My whole body was throbbing in pain, as if the very air itself was slowly eating away at my flesh. As my heavy eyelids fluttered open, I saw that I was in a bright, white room surrounded by a number of gray, blurry silhouettes. They were speaking among themselves in hushed whispers as if I couldn't hear them. I could quite clearly, I just didn't understand their language. Some of them seemed frightened or concerned. Others sounded stern and cold. I was lying down on something hard and flat, but I couldn't move. It felt as if I were bound. Even if I were free, my body suddenly felt incredibly heavy. I couldn't move, and I could barely breathe. My mind was foggy. I couldn't think. Through my exhaustion, I could barely observe. That garish, blinding light was raining down from right above my face, burning into my eyes like a white, hot sun. It reflected in the dark, soulless eyes of one of the beings as it slowly approached me, and that same light shined across the tip of a long, thin, sharp blade within its hands. It was attached to a vial which held a strange liquid. The being stabbed it into me and injected me with the vile substance. I could feel it slowly burning through my veins like acid, racking my entire body with pain, and what little movement I had left was ripped away from me at once. That was when another being approached from the blurry light. They proceeded to quickly and roughly clamp my head in place with some cold, metal machinery, and then they revealed another odd utensil, one that they used to slowly, cautiously, and ever so painfully carve out my left eye. I weakly watched through my one remaining ocular orb as they placed the amputated one in some sort of glass container. It was filled with a bubbling liquid. That particular being then departed, studying it as it faded into the light once more. A third being then approached from the gaggle of eerily unnatural blurry faces in the distance. It then proceeded to slip strange gloves onto its oddly shaped hands before forcing my mouth open and studying it. After revealing a much smaller, handheld set of clamps, it used them to horrifically twist, break, and rip out one of my lower teeth, placing its hand onto the top of my jaw and pushing my head downward to do so. With it out, it placed it in a tiny containment receptacle and returned to the blurry light. Finally, the original being showed a much larger blade before lowering it within its eerily massive hand, placing the tip of it to the top of my chest, and pierced it. I felt the warm blood pool at my collarbone before running down both sides of my neck. The blade then slowly, agonizingly, severed me apart down to my pelvis. The pain was somehow numbing, eerily chilling, and as that evil being did this, I saw its beady little eyes light up in sick, wicked pleasure. I weakly gazed up into the light, letting it sear into my single remaining eye. My mind was blank. In that moment, my every sense had been replaced by pure, sharp, maddening pain, and in my 3 hearts I knew I was going to die a slow, agonizing death. This creature was so odd in nature, so different from me and my kind. Its body seemed thicker than ours, but softer, squishier, pink in color when compared to my silver. It was draped in odd white coverings and had a bulbous round nose on its freakishly shaped face. Gigantic in size, it also had 5 fingers instead of my 3. It was truly hideous. Only then did I notice my life mate adjacent to me. They were lying on a strange silver slab, still, lifeless, their much shivering silver skin darkened, covered in open, fleshy burns. Their large, black, almond-shaped eyes seemed to have closed forever, and suddenly I remembered the horror that brought us there. My life mate and I were explorers, scientists. With a loving bond that was envied among our people, we worked together, extending our reach to the edges of countless galaxies, helping those in need, sharing our technology, and spreading kindness everywhere we went. On that dark day, we were on a routine mission to study the Earthlings, to somehow stop them from creating weapons that would destroy themselves. Indeed, we were told to be careful by our commanding officers, as it had been a millennia since our peoples were in contact. Long past were the days of our assistance with the cosmic energy-gathering pyramids and the shared technology of Atlantis. Although we were once featured in their art, their folk tales, we had become little more than a horror story in the minds of our former friends. It was a galactic war that had pulled us away from them, one that threatened the very universe. It was long, violent, and dark, and our people were all but wiped out. But our earthling friends remained on our minds as in our hearts, and so we returned only to discover that they had almost forgotten us. The ones that still believed were ridiculed and thought of as mad, although the lying leaders that had taken over during our absence all seemed to know better. Despite this, we knew in our three hearts that the earthlings desperately needed our help. They had fallen into pits of hatred for their fellow peoples. Fear and prejudice seemed to pervade the very oxygen they breathed as they were abusing, raping, killing one another. Different wars were waging every day among them, and they did not seem to remember that they were all the same people. We needed to help them once again, and perhaps we, like we always had, saw the best in them, and naively hoped that their inner light would prevail. Thus we had no idea the terror that awaited us on that accursed planet. Though we did see some good on that planet, children laughing and playing, lovers expressing their adoration for another, a few people actively trying to help the downtrodden. It was mostly a war zone. Humans were starving in the streets while their leaders grew fat, hoarding the wealth they invented to control the masses. Religion had traumatized the youth, threatening them with an imaginary damnation for simple things like loving someone of the same gender or identifying as a gender differing from the one they were told they were. They had made up so many ridiculous rules for themselves that they did not realize it was binding them, keeping them from evolving both physically and spiritually, as they were meant to. They had truly become monsters. Self-destructive monsters. Our demise began when our cloaking device malfunctioned. Spotted on their sonar, we were shot down at once. Despite our best efforts, our starship crashed on the dry, barren desert within a massive explosion, and it was then that the next thing I knew, I was awakened within that harsh light. My beloved life mate had not survived the crash. I found myself relieved at that because I wouldn't have been able to bear seeing them in the pain that I was in, these earthlings violating them, playing with them like a toy. I was grateful that that wasn't going to be my final memory of them. Perhaps it was best that I was to die as well, for I knew that I could not face life without them, and if I were to, I knew that I would become a victim of the growing hatred in my hearts for the human species, turning me into a monster just like they had become. The earthling scientists were studying me, playing with my internal organs like children. Some of them held primitive pads in which they wrote down notes. However, the main one smiled widely as it pulled some of my dully hued insides out, proudly presenting them to me, and its terribly dark, tiny eyes were the very last thing I saw before I joined my life mate in death. We should have given up on them. We should have left them to their own destructive devices. We should have let them destroy themselves. It would have left the galaxy a safer place.